All right. I want to thank everybody for joining us for part 2 of our seminar series on transit and work. We're really thrilled to have this diverse panel of folks who have all these different perspectives on transit, from research to government to provision of transit. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and then I'll have them talk a little bit more about where they're coming from when they think about transit. We're honored to be joined today by Dr. Reid Ewing, a distinguished professor of city and metropolitan planning at the University of Utah. Nichol Bourdeaux, who is the Chief Planning and Engagement Officer at the Utah Transit Authority, Salt Lake City Council Member Darin Mano, and Cecilee Price-Huish, an advocate, attorney, and graduate student studying transit. Since Nichol is at the top of my screen, I'm going to arbitrarily ask her to kick us off by just telling us a little bit about your relationship with transit, your experience professionally and personally, your interest, and the constituents, if any, that you serve in your work.
Thank you, Cami. I'm excited to be here. And like I said, I love talking about transit. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Planning Engagement Officer here at UTA, and I've been here about 7 years. I previously worked for Ralph Becker's administration, and at that time, it was looking at all things planning. My relationship with transit is interesting. I rode the bus when I was a child from probably 12 to about 16 every day to go to school. And it was the UTA bus. And it's been it was amazing experience for me because the bus operators were always nice. They'd wait for you. But it also gave me an opportunity to go to a school outside of my district. So that's always been special to me. And my child now rides the bus as well. And so that's my personal relationship with transit. I think my professional relationship with transit is just having opportunities for people. I know what it's like to stand outside in the cold. I know what it's like to this be your only means of transportation. And so as I think about planning and what a resource the community has in transit, you know, I don't take it lightly what I do every day. And I really respect what we do and how it can change people's lives.
Wonderful, thank you. Darin, do you want to tell us a little bit about your relationship with transit?
Sure. My name is Darin Mano. I serve on the Salt Lake City Council. I'm this year's City Council Chair. I represent District 5, which is the area around Liberty Park. I grew up in Sandy, Utah, and I did my undergraduate studies at the University of Utah, and that's probably the time when I most frequently used transit, because my first few years there I was living at home with my parents and would ride bus, at the time it was called bus number 8, up to the University of Utah every day, and did my studies that way. My other personal experiences with transit have to do with transit systems outside of Utah. I did grad school in Boston and used the MTA, the T there. And then I also spent some time in Japan, and then I love to travel. So I think using public transportation in different cities is actually one of the ways that I judge a city that I've traveled to, because it's really sort of the infrastructure or the skeleton of the city. And the way that you get around as a tourist a lot of the time. And so for me, that's those are some of the experiences that I have. And then as in my work on the city council, we of course work closely with UTA. We are not the transportation agency, but we work closely with UTA in a lot of our efforts. There are a few transit lines that we actually subsidize through the city so that we can have 15-minute head times instead of 30. And the city pays a bit of an additional fee out of our tax base so that our residents can have 15-minute frequent transit networks on a few of the lines. But we also, of course, it's really important to us to do planning efforts around the transit stations, especially the tracks and front runner stations, and figuring out transit-oriented design and development is really important to me. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I like the many different transit systems that you've experienced. Reid, would you like to talk a little bit next?
Sure. Thank you for including me on the panel. I mentioned just before we started that I'm buying a townhouse as a investment property, and my criterion was it's got to be close to tracks. And the one that I'm buying on 400 South is about, I think I said 200 feet from the platform near 900 East. So I have studied TOD, transit-oriented development, extensively. I've studied transit and its effect on VMT and hence on CO2 emissions extensively. A lot of my research has been funded by recent research by UTA. Last night I had drinks with Hal Johnson and Jay Fox downtown. So my relationship, particularly with Hal, is a very close friendship and working relationship. They're funding a couple of our projects right now. I won't mention both of them, but we're one on gentrification, where we think that gentrification, to the extent it's occurring, often causes lower income and minority residents of transit station areas to be displaced to the suburbs where there isn't the same kind of transit access, and that has a direct effect on all sorts of things, including CO2 emissions, which has always been my big thing. I think it's the existential threat, as does everyone else, that we face right now. I share Darin's perspective. When I travel, I often find myself using transit as the most convenient and cost-effective mode of transportation, and that's in other cities. When I was at the University of Maryland and was in the DC area. I used it for all my trips that were downtown or with that great system that they have. Could be in Virginia, could be in Maryland, etc. So very high quality transit, is a must for a great city. A great city has high quality transit. We're getting there. We're not there yet. We're not a big city. We're not DC. We're not New York, etc. But we're on our way to having a very, very good transit system, and that's despite declines in ridership, which I'll be talking about later, and why they're occurring and what can be done to reverse them.
Wonderful, thank you. And Cecilee, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship with transit.
Thank you. First of all, I just love the question, what is your relationship with transit? Because I think that is a relationship that we experience every day. And just like a human relationship, it can be a healthy one or an unhealthy one. And so anyway, I feel very grateful to be here today. And I hope to learn quite a bit from all of you. I like Darin, I also serve on a city council. I serve on the Bountiful City Council, and we don't have quite the same transportation networks that are in the Salt Lake Valley or Salt Lake County. But hopefully we'll be getting more. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Utah. I'm in my final year of my Master's of Public Policy. And I'm going to be doing my capstone on zero fare transit and kind of how the impacts or outcomes that may have on air quality, economic impact, quality of life issues, all of the things that you all have already mentioned. And so I've actually my capstone advisor is here as well today, Dr. Curtis. So I'm happy about that as well. I am really interested in the nexus of accessible transit and opportunity attainment, whether that's educational or employment, quality of life, access to healthcare. And like I said, I live in Bountiful. We have two main bus lines, the 455, and that is a line that members of my family are frequent flyers. I often drive to the university if I go, but have used the 455 and the 470 and a front runner stop in Woods Cross, our neighbor city. And I think kind of something that's been really exciting in Bountiful and in South Davis County is that we've been part of the microtransit pilot program. And when that first started, I was very excited. I've used it a couple of times and it is slick. It's I have had no problems with it. And what I've spoken to other people. And I think that is a really intriguing program that's kind of filling a gap and helping, especially in a place like Davis County, South Davis County specifically. The further north you get, and then as you enter into Weber County, there's more east-west connectivity. But in South Davis County, we have significant issues with east-west connectivity. So I think that is a really cool solution right now to kind of that last mile problem. And something that I often hear as a member of city council here is people are hoping for more routes, better access, build out of the BRT through South Davis County. There are also some people who are like, we don't want the BRT, but I think we have a pretty fairly consistent policy position among leadership that we want the BRT, and we are working to try and make that, to be amenable partners for that when it comes. We're in the middle of conducting a general plan update. And so Reid, I really appreciate your mention of the transit oriented development. We're looking at that right now. We don't have a lot of space to grow in Bountiful, but I think like just as I'm looking at all of this, whether you have infill or you have redevelopment or room to grow, I think you as policy purveyors in the world of policy, we're at least here we're looking how can we be open to and make our zoning so it is more amenable to this transit oriented development. And I could go on and on. I just feel like well, maybe I'll just end right there. I am happy to be here. I hope to learn from you all.
Wonderful, thank you. And I want to kind of leap off what you said about, you've got these access to some routes that get to the places we need to go, but that can be a little bit difficult, especially when it comes to the last mile. So I'll take us around the circle again and begin with Nichol and ask you, from your professional perspective, what do you see as the relationship between work and transit? I think we might have lost her. All right, I'll go ahead and send the question over to Darin and ask you, what do you see as the relationship between work and transit?
Well, I'm not an expert on the data, and I think the other people on this call may know this a lot better, but my understanding is that a lot of, when you look at the demographics of people that are frequent transit riders, it's actually, what I've heard is it's actually people from a low socioeconomic status and very high, because it's the people that work downtown, have those sort of traditional white collar office jobs that the system's really built to get them to Salt Lake City, and it's easy for them to get from the last mile isn't an issue because they're working right downtown. And then it's people that are using it out of necessity that tend to use it sort of daily users. And so I think that figuring out where employment centers are is and getting those to be easily accessed by transit is important. One of the things that we're looking at in the city, so Salt Lake City is the airport is owned by the city, and we are working closely with UTA and with the airport board to try and get the transit to be better for the people that are actually working there that need to get there before the bus routes start or leave after, because the airport is a 24-hour employment center, but the trax lines don't actually run all night long. So that's one thing that we need to look at. And then I just think urban planning wise, if we're designing our cities, the more we look towards urbanization and clustering our employment centers together, I think that makes it a little bit easier than if we continue to sprawl and have people working throughout. I say that as a person that lives downtown and works in Midvale, so.
Well, in Utah, we have limited room to sprawl, so we've got some limited choices there. Thank you. Reid, would you like to fill in with your scholarly perspective?
Sure. Yeah, two things. First, I'll say that nationally, in big cities in Washington, D.C. and New York and so on, the statistics are very different. But nationally, we know that transit carries about, as I recall, 5% of all work trips, 3% of all trips. So work is the dominant purpose for transit use in the country. And even though 5% sounds small, in some metropolitan areas, it's 30%. So as you urbanize and as you grow, transit becomes more and more important. And what I did for this, and I don't want to take much time, but I've got lots and lots of academic references. I'm going to give you one, and if you want 10, I'll give you 10, but I don't think you want 10. But a study in 2017 explored the effect of closing a transit system, a transit line in New York City following Hurricane Sandy, the effect on the unemployment rate, and found a significant relationship between increases in unemployment and public rail transit disruption, particularly for minority populations. And as I say, I've got lots and lots of those. I'll give you just a couple more. And then what we could do is I could share this with you. It was written by a student who did a literature review for me after I was invited. And I've highlighted the best evidence that transit does create jobs. But I'll give another example is a study done by a friend, Tom Sanchez, who's kind of the expert on transit and equity in the United States, maybe worldwide. And he looked at Atlanta and Portland and found that public transit accessibility is a significant factor for determining average rates of labor participation. That is the percentage of people in an area that participate in the labor force. And I could go on and on and on with examples like that. So there's a good solid literature, which I wasn't fully aware of. I was aware of Sanchez's work, but we have 10 studies here that show that even though it varies by mode, bus for regular bus service tending to be more important for employment of lower income people. And that's kind of a point I think Darin made. And rail more important for higher income professional people. It is very important where it's important. And we want to encourage TOD. we have studied transit-oriented development ourselves, and found that in these transit-oriented developments, like we don't have any great examples here yet. We're going to have some great examples, but you know, we've got City Creek Center, which is a TOD. We've got Gateway, which is a TOD. We've got probably a total of 5 or 6 TODs under development. And what we found is these TODs, transit-oriented developments that are very close to stations, often abutting stations, have 30% transit ridership. So we can, by building a fire clay, if you're familiar with that Murray TOD, we can get transit mode shares that are dramatically higher than the average for the region. So my push right now, and in the studies we're doing for UTA and others, for one of the new UTCs is on equitable transit-oriented communities. UTC is a University Transportation Center, and we're part of 2 of them. And we're doing one study of gentrification, one study of transit ridership. You put these developments right next to transit. They're dense, they're mixed use, they're pedestrian friendly, and on and on. They're built after transit was in place, and you can get very, very substantial mode shares, not just among transit dependents, which I guess is a term that isn't favored anymore, but I mean people who don't have automobiles and don't have choice necessarily for the work trip, which is the longest trip people take in the day. Typically, they may not, if they don't own an automobile, they don't have an alternative to transit for a longer trip. So for those people who live in TODs, you're getting use of transit as a choice because they typically own automobiles. And I'll just end with one last thing. We've studied, the S line and the development that's spurred. It's about $2 billion worth of investment, mostly in multifamily housing. And we've studied 400 South. Both of these were for UTA. And what we're getting along the S line and along 400 South is more transit adjacent development than transit oriented development. Those luxury apartments that have gone up just all the way along 400 South. If you drove it when I first moved here, you drive it today, it's an entirely different corridor with all of these mid-rise apartment buildings, but they're still transit adjacent rather than transit oriented. So we have to find a way, and this comes under challenges, but we have to find a way to incentivize or require developers of these fairly dense projects to make them TODs rather than TADs with some affordable housing for low and moderate income households. That's something that I know the mayor, I asked her at her campaign office opening about it. It's something I know she's interested in. I'm sure Darin is as well. There apparently are some stumbling blocks in state law, but that's what we should be doing, and that's what other places are doing. They're getting affordable units in around transit stations.
Thank you for the folks who really need them. Nichol, since we lost you earlier, I'm going to come back around to you and ask you at UTA, what do you think about when it comes to transit and people's work? What is the relationship that you see, and how does that kind of affect how UTA makes decisions?
Well, I think Darin and Reid probably touched on this, but so I apologize if I'm repeating. You know, after the pandemic, we've seen some changes, and we don't like to refer to, you know, before, but because we've kind of moved past it. But I think that idea of what transit is to people. We have a commuter. The system was built. The rail system was built on a commuter base. So was the bus. But after the pandemic and during the pandemic, what we saw is the vital need of our bus service all day. So you didn't see these big peaks in the morning or big peaks at night, like the 8 to 5. That was no longer existing. We saw essential people constantly all through the day. So our ridership during the day kind of flattened. And then what you also see now is people are using transit, and this goes to free fare too, if you're interested. People are using transit now for entertainment, just like why they're coming downtown. Entertainment, food, activity. They're not using transit to go to work because, as Reid said, people that work and commute now, it's not 5 days a week anymore. The hybrid schedule has allowed for the upper social classes to maybe come to work downtown once a week or twice a week. And that really, you know, you don't get in that routine and you don't feel like you need to use transit. But come Saturday, our numbers will have a increase of Saturday ridership like 126% on one Sunday. And I think we're probably about on some lines as high as that on bus on Saturday as well. So we're really seeing Saturday and Sunday push up when people have time to entertain themselves, and work schedules flattening out. So again, to the essential workers are using our system constantly, but that commuter base is gone. So it's a different look. Yeah.
That's fascinating. There's nothing that the pandemic didn't touch, apparently. Cecilee, anything that you'd like to jump in with the relationship between people's access to transit and their ability to access and get to their work? Oh, sorry, it looks like you're muted.
Sorry about that. I would like to just touch on a couple of things that Reid mentioned and then maybe ask a couple of questions. I really appreciate what Nichol mentioned about, now I'm just on the very front end of learning about this, and I don't, like Darin, I don't claim to be an expert. But I am interested in what you mentioned, Nichol, that what you're learning from ridership patterns is that people are using transit more and more for these quality of life issues, whether it's entertainment, recreation, relationships, social, being part of the larger social structure and community, and that work is part of that. And that's, I'm finding some of that in just my research.
Mm-hmm.
And Reid, when you say you have the 10 studies, I would love all 10. Please, I'm going to reach out to you and ask for all of those. So I appreciate that a lot. And I'd love to read that. And a study that I read recently, and you're probably familiar with this, Reid, is a randomized control trial that was done in King County, which is where Seattle is. And they had a control group that they gave 0 fare passes to, and then then the alternate group was, they gave cash, like not an equivalent, but had it been used for transit, it would have been like the equivalent of maybe half of their public transit costs. And you had to be have a very low income to qualify to be in this trial. Anyway, the bottom line, jumping forward, is that they found that there was a higher statistical significance in correlation to transit use and these quality of life issues than transit use and job opportunity, or utilize. Maybe it wasn't even job opportunity, but what they were looking at, and I'd love it if you have further information on this, Reid, is what they were looking at is at the end of the study, it was very short, only 6 months long, was what was the outcome in new jobs among the people who were part of the control group with the zero fare transit pass. And it was about 3.2 or 3.5% increase in job attainment. But the quality of life issues, which included some things that were surprising to me, like interactions with the judicial system, the criminal justice system, access to all kinds of other social services, et cetera, that was like double in statistical significance correlation to the use of a zero fare pass. And I was surprised by that. That was a study that kind of went from 2019 to 2020. And so I think like and Reid, also, you mentioned the suburbanization outcome of gentrification. And I think that's something that I'm also thinking about as this, the landscape in these urban cores or job center cores has pushed prices up. We know all of the data on like, you know, the growth in Utah is just exponential. The housing prices, it's pushing people farther afield where there aren't maybe transit options right now. And then that inequity becomes even stronger because the maybe gas prices and wear and tear on a vehicle, or your ability to even have a vehicle, and how close you are to a transit route. And so I'm interested in those questions. I just want to kind of draw it back to my little town. I'm curious to know, Reid, the difference, kind of what are the real nuances between a transit adjacent versus a transit oriented development? Because we have a development that is many years in the making, and it's kind of, we're in the messy, you know, sauce of it right now. We're in the meat grinding phase of it right now in Bountiful. And it's just, in my mind, we have been referring to it as transit-oriented development. We allowed a zoning change for higher density. We're hoping that developers are bringing in, you know, some affordable and other types of a mix of housing options. And it's where the BRT is proposed to run through. It's also mixed use, but what are the specific nuances between those? Do you mind if I just ask that?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Is that okay?
I'm happy to answer it, but we're already well into this. Maybe we should have the conversation offline. I will give you just one very quick answer to it. If you know Station Park in Farmington, with big box retail and a commuter rail, a front runner station, with the big box retail and the sea of parking in front of those big boxes,
Yep.
And the fact that to get to the pedestrian oriented portion, it's a half mile walking from the station. That's transit adjacent. There is a transit station. It is literally adjacent, but it is not at all oriented. The development is not at all oriented. And the mode share, unlike the 30% for a Renko station or Rhode Island Row or Mockingbird Station, or all these famous TODs that we've studied, rather than having 30% transit mode share, the Station Park in Farmington has under 10%. walking and transit. So the early, I'm going on longer than I should. The early plans for Station Park were transit oriented, and it's a long story why it ended up being transit adjacent. I would say that the those mid-rise buildings along 400 South, where they have luxury apartments rather than affordable apartments, and they have 2 parking spaces per apartment, and they don't interface well with the street. You've got parking at ground level rather than retail. Those kinds of developments are transit adjacent rather than transit oriented. And just to end my little story here, when transit first was put in out to the university on the Red Line, there was a huge drop in traffic on 400 South, almost 20,000 vehicles a day. And students at the U and faculty at the U were using transit rather than a car to get to the U. So you would think with all the development that's occurring on 400 South, all this fairly dense development, 5-6 story development of apartments, you would have a big increase in transit ridership on the Red Line. You don't. Transit ridership has actually gone down a little bit since the heady days when it first opened, and it was solving traffic problems in the corridor. So that's what I'm talking about. And that takes us back to inclusionary zoning and things that the city council and the mayor should be talking and thinking about. And I understand their legal issues, but that's where we should be heading.
Thank you. It's useful to know the difference between transit-oriented and transit-adjacent developments. Nichol, you mentioned earlier that, UTA tracks who is taking transit to work and how essential workers are taking it throughout the day. And earlier, Darin mentioned, these professionals are taking transit downtown. What are some of the unknowns about transit and work? We're a research center dedicated to healthy and equitable work. What sort of research would you like to see coming out of places like ours?
I think, to Reid's point, it's land use.
Mm-hmm.
And we really, I can't tell you how much it is the challenge for us as transit providers to look at the cost of, housing, the cost of transit, and the intersection of how we help people get a better life and move through. We really struggle with the articulating the benefits of transit and low-income housing or moderate housing, and how that does connect to health and quality of life. But working with the municipalities and explaining the land use, walkability, cul-de-sacs don't work. We have a lot of adjacent, or to Reid's point, adjacent density that really we can't access, and it's not safe or it's not comfortable for someone to walk. So those first and last mile challenges, which benefit everybody health-wise, by the way, but they're just, those connectivities aren't there. So, anybody ask me what is a challenge with UTA growing and making those connections? It's a lot about land use, and then of course operators, right? We need people to run all of this, and the work system is changing, right? We are based on an old system in the 70s. We've been around, and how people work at UTA is very different than the expectations of how people want things on demand. I know we talked about on demand. They want things instantly. It's a very different world. So there's a lot of things that I'd like to see studied, but I think the big thing is land use, and then also the changing world of, employees. and how we can continue a system like that, because that's a huge challenge for us today, and how the world's kind of changing on that access.
Yeah, thank you. Darin, from the city council's perspective, what kind of research would help you make decisions in terms of people being able to use transit to get to work?
I think it's interesting because I do think a lot of the focus we have with UTA and statewide transit issues is that commuting to work. But in Salt Lake City, we're thinking about our constituents and our residents. We all, our residents all live in Salt Lake City, and so it's that what we were talking about getting people that are coming to visit our city. So it's less our residents, but it's more like the people that are coming downtown to see a jazz game or that are coming to the symphony. And so some of those initiatives like Tickets to Transit, which is would be an interesting maybe study for Cecilee to include in her work, which is not a zero fare, but it is a zero fare if you have a ticket to an event downtown, right? Like it would be interesting to know how successful that actually is, and how many people are using that wouldn't otherwise use that if they had to pay for the ticket into town. I do think that it's interesting so we live downtown and my in-laws live up in Hooper, so far north and west. And when they did the free fare February, they came to visit us on transit just because they wanted to use the train. So I think some of those, like how are people coming into the city, and do more people come into the city if the fares are reduced or free, and if we have the places for them to go that they can get to once they get into the city. And so I love this discussion about land use and how it relates to transit and how it relates to whether or not people actually are willing to or want to use transit, because I think that's super important. And land use is the whole issue that I think got me interested in serving on the city council, and connected between my work as an architect and in policy. So I don't know that I answered your question, but I do think, as in my role in city council, we're often thinking about it from a slightly different perspective, which is how do we get the rest of you all to come downtown?
Once we've got everyone to work, how do we get everybody else there? Thank you. Reid, you've obviously had a huge body of research on transit. Where do you think work should come in some of the research in the future?
I mentioned that we had drinks last night with Jay Fox. I didn't identify him. Nichol knows who he is, but not everyone necessarily does. He's the executive director of UTA, and he was saying that the research, and this actually is more to an earlier point you made, Cami, than this question, but that what he'd love to see is a study that estimates the economic benefit of transit across the economy. And I guess that right now UTA receives a subsidy of something like, if subsidy is the right term, if it's not, I apologize, but 250,000 or million, excuse me, 250 million a year. And it may produce $1 billion worth of economic value. Like we found that I mentioned before that the S line and the rezonings that occurred at around the same time as the S line are producing about $2 billion worth of value, property value. That isn't taken into account when one simply looks at fare box revenue return. And what I'm going to suggest is maybe we work together on a U-Track project. You're your institutes and my department for the next round of what's called UTRAC, which is the funding program for UDOT and UTA on Jay's very interesting study. What is the total value of transit? And I can tell you that we're doing work now for the California Air Resources Board on what's called the transit multiplier. And this isn't the economic value of transit, but that for every vehicle mile that, meaning auto mile, driving a mile in an automobile, for every vehicle mile that's reduced directly by transit, because someone takes transit rather than driving their car, there's a 3 or 4 or 5 times greater impact indirectly, because if you have transit, everyone's mentioning land use. They got it absolutely right. That's the issue. If you have transit oriented communities or developments or cities, people walk more, and that reduces car use. People bike more. They take shorter auto trips, etc. So the transit multiplier that we're developing for the California Air Resources Board under their incredible the things that are happening in California, you can hardly believe being here in Utah in terms of land use planning and transit oriented development and so on. You know, these multiplier effects are so important and have to be part of the conversation. And offering you, if you want it, Cami, a chance to compete for Jay's project. We'll do it together.
That sounds fantastic. Cecilee, I'll go ahead and hand the question over to you. We've heard from all the other folks. Is there anything that you'd like to add when we think about the relationship between people's work and transit? It looks like you're on mute again.
I keep doing that. I'm really sorry. Okay, so I would echo, I really would like the same information and research and data that Reid has mentioned, those economic kind of multiplier impacts, those downstream things that that maybe I feel like we don't have like really, or maybe we don't. You would know so much better than I do, Reid, but what are the impacts on like job, not only job attainment, but retention, days, fewer days missed due to a multiplicity of factors, how that impacts income tax receipts, sales tax, better health outcomes, fewer ER visits. I mean, it could just balloon and explode. And so like when I think about those kinds of things, I think, oh, that's so research heavy and will really require like some well-crafted metrics and measures of what is going to be kind of the parameters there. I also think there's something that's kind of easier that we could do in the short term that wouldn't require tons of research, and maybe it's already been done, but Cache Valley Transit, they're up in Logan. They've been doing zero fare transit for many, many years. And one of the things that is often mentioned as benefit for their zero fare transit program is the lack of a need to have an administrative system to enforce fare box or build out fare boxes, have an entire administrative system. I think that would be helpful information for decision makers. Like, we know that Todd Weiler last year proposed I can't think of the word right now, a
Zero fare study.
Appropriation. Yeah, an appropriation for $25 million for a 1-year transit study where there would be zero fare transit. And I have spoken with him and he's indicated he's asking for that again this year. And, you know, whether that has traction, maybe not. I mean, but regardless, I feel like there's some information that the UTA could maybe provide about what is the cost of administration for the fare collection, enforcement, accounting, the cost association for who there are those free programs like you mentioned, Darin. You know, we thought about using it when we were, except to have kind of a broken foot right now, so we had to park closer. But we had a ticket to the University of Utah Oregon game, and my husband's like, let's go on the transit because we have a ticket. Just boom. I'm like, I get that, but I have a broken foot. So anyway, like, what is the cost of determining eligibility and maintenance of those programs and enforcement and like the cost to dwell time at, I just think that seems like something that there could be some less intensive research, but something that could be determined on the administrative level that could be useful.
Thank you, Darin.
I just wanted to mention one thing that, so I think I said I'm an architect, and I consider myself a zoning nerd. And so I got into politics because of that. I didn't study political science, and I'm not a public policy expert and things like that. But one thing that, having served on the city council now for 4 years, I am learning is there are a lot of good reasons why we in this country have a decentralized government, right? Like there's a lot of concentration of power in a totalitarian system that can be obviously bad for obvious reasons, but there are a few problems that to me feel like they could be solved so much easier if our government wasn't so fragmented. And I think transportation is one of them. Homelessness is another one. But in specific to transportation, there are all those economic benefits, but those come in sales tax to cities and counties, not necessarily to UTA. So it's hard to, like, it becomes this intergovernmental agreement that we're going to stop charging fares and do this. But the bigger thing to me is I'm frustrated. I get frustrated that UTA and UDOT are so separated, because how much money are we spending to expand a freeway when maybe we could double track front runner and avoid the problem altogether? But separate agencies are tasked with separate things and have separate budgets for those things. And so we're not looking at the trickle down effects of increasing public transit on things like property taxes or sales taxes, because they're so separated. And yes, we look at them, but I think that's where the academic community, like yourself, like a lot of you on this call, can really help government break down some of those silos and think more holistically. And so appreciate this conversation for that reason.
Thanks so much. And we too, one of the reasons we're so interested in transit is it's like work. It unites a lot of things that we often think of as these kind of very different realms. I see we're running out of time. I wanted to really quickly open up to the audience. I know we had some Zoom troubles, but anyone have any questions for our panelists?
I wondered, my name is Emily Ahonen, and I'm the director of the Research Center convening this conversation, and also a constituent of Darin's. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and to Jenna for helping to coordinate it. I'm just wondering when we talk about separateness, and we've talked a lot about transit and work, do you feel that there is more traction in conversation in your realms about transit and health, or transit and environment and thus health, than work? And I'm asking because I wonder sometimes if mimicking those arguments from a research stance that are working better and adapting them to your realm is a worthwhile pursuit. So I'm thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, this is another study, Cami, in response to your question, what should we be studying? And it may have already been studied, because I know that early work on sprawl and the costs of sprawl and so on, and public health benefits of active transportation, we're kind of heading in this direction. But we think of active transportation as walking and bicycling, basically. And but transit is active transportation. The vast majority of people walk at one end or the other or both of their transit trip. And a really cool study would be taking this recent statewide travel survey that I think is just being released this week, and looking at just how far people or how much physical activity people get using transit. And it could be very substantial. And that's one of those benefits of transit that obviously doesn't show up in the fare box and doesn't even show up in sales taxes, but it's potentially significant. And so when we propose our joint project to UTRAC, maybe we can throw that in there too.
That sounds good. I have a lot of thoughts, but I also see that Julie put a question in the chat. If we could make that be the last question so that we include that one. And Julie wants to know, how is this playing out in the high growth area of Utah County? And Julie, would you mind putting in the chat or saying what you mean by this? How is what playing out in the high growth area of Utah County?
Yes. Oh, sorry. So my question is, how are we utilizing data, and especially as we're considering center municipality development and transit? I'm sorry, I came a little late to the conversation, but I'm just wondering how we're translating the data to high growth areas like Utah County, where we don't have tracks options that go all the way to the south end of the county, where we don't have UBX and other mass transit options. This is the time, it seems like, from a public policy perspective, we ought to be implementing and designing with a very different approach. And I just don't know what's happening with those conversations and what lawmakers are considering as they're creating zoning laws and ordinances. And that's my perspective.
Julie, I could address that a little bit with the planning efforts, and Reid, you probably know this as well, but this kind of goes to what Darin was saying about how do we coordinate with UDOT and how do we take, so this is a little bit of sausage making, but I'm gonna, so we have a unified plan, a state plan that not many states have. And that unified plan looks at the metropolitan planning organizations from all the way down south to all the way up in Cache County, and along the Wasatch Front, right, which is the majority of where people live. In there, we look at our plans, our 30-year plans, our regional transportation plans that we work with these MPOs on. That has transportation and transit use in them. And that also is, each one of our plans is adopted by the municipalities that respond to those planning organizations. So in Utah County, it's called MAG, Mountain Lands Association, So then everybody puts into that MAG regional plan, and then that comes forward to the unified plan. So when looking at growth at Utah County, right, like you talked about, if you look at the plan, we have a BRT going down Central Corridor, right? Or tracks going down Central Corridor, the expansion of Front Runner with the double track, but also expansion into Payson, and then connectivity into Santaquin. We have on-demand and innovative mobility zones up north, to your point, in Lehigh and those places that are dense but not very accessible. So I think as the transportation and the planning organizations, we try to look out, and that is based on modeling and growth and all of those things. But going back to Reid's point about the new survey that's coming out, there's still data that can inform us as we make those plans going forward. And some of these benefits and returns and implementing like active transportation, I think can really help us expand kind of our look. This is the first year our plan has active transportation as part of it. So I think there's ways that we need to kind of increase it and understand our effects with transportation, roads, and also local bus, and then also regional connectivity. So I hope that answered a little bit of your question. And
thank you all so much. It's been a real pleasure to hear everybody's perspective. Cecilee, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a really quick question. Nichol or Reid probably could answer it. Referring to the survey, how is that survey being delivered, and how is the sample determined?
So
I can put it in the chat, and Reid, if you want to explain, I'll put the link into the chat so you can look at it.
That's okay. These are done through recruitment. Households are recruited to participate. I was involved in the last one, not this most recent one that's just this week being made available, but the households get some sort of, I forget, some small token award for participating, and they keep a travel diary for a day. They have every trip they make, every member of the household, and then the trips in the household location are geocoded, so you know exactly where the trip starts and exactly where it ends. And the data are cleaned. The data come in, as you'd expect from individual people, not always in the best shape. Someone in the household doesn't report at all. But as of this week, I saw an email announcement of the fact that the data for 2022 are now available. And it's a big database with hundreds of thousands of trips that are representative of all of our trip making. So these people who participate, the thousands of households, are supposed to be representative of all of us. And so you have low income, you have high income, you've got minority, you've got non-minority, you got college educated, you got high school educated, and all that socioeconomic data and all the travel data and the geocodes allow you to look at, in particular, the effect of the D variables, which haven't been mentioned today, but density, diversity, design, etc., determine how, in large part, in demographics, households' travel patterns. So the data are available. You probably want to talk to someone at WFRC or UDOT about the data, and they will help you study whatever you want to study with this massive of data that is available free of charge.
Thank you. I have some questions. I'm going to reach out to you.
Please do.
It's okay.
Please do. Well, this has been fun. I wish we had more people.
I apologize for I think we had some issues with Zoom, but we'll get this up on social media and share it with some of the folks who I know are really interested. And I just wanted to thank all our panelists again. So thank you so much for joining us. And it's really great to hear about transit and work from all these different perspectives. So thank you.
Thank you, Cameron.
Bye. Take care. Take care, everyone. And I will be hearing from one of you. Yes. I'm pretty sure. And I'll send you our little literature survey.
Thank you. I would really appreciate that. Have a good night.